Computer. Guys, good afternoon, and wherever you guys are in the world, welcome to the another episode of the Unbreakable Podcast. Today we have Tim Windsor as an incredible guest. Tim, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much. It's great to be with you. It's been great to connect with you a little bit online, and now we'll do this podcast together.
Yeah, I know that I know how we got connected. We got connected through my podcast that I did with SDK.
Yeah,
Um, Tell us who you are, what you do, and why you do it.
sure. So I'm Tim Windsor. Who am I? I'm still trying to figure that out. I think, Sarah, I'm trying to figure out who I want to be next in my life because it's a constant reinvention. But I've been a consultant, trainer, and coach for about 30 years. But I invented a world about maybe 15 years ago called uncommodified,
Hmm.
aka the shirt. So hey, there you go. And this world for me is all about understanding that we are created in a unique situation. Every child that's born is quite unique, and yet over time we're trained to fit in and fit into the boxes that we create for ourselves and other people create for us. And I came to the conclusion that's not really great in life and business, and so I started this idea about what does it mean to be uncommodified. Primarily in business in the beginning, because I did a lot of consulting in highly commoditized industries. And so, how do you uncommodify that experience from a consumer perspective? But then that led me to a more important journey of uncommodification, which is the uncommodification of myself and others, because I think that's the biggest problem that we have is that we want to emulate, which is there's a great part of emulation, but the problem with emulation is that after a while, if we're not careful, we become someone or something we're not meant to be. And I think that's hard to maintain. It's fake and false. And at the end of the day, I think we're created uniquely for a reason, and we ought to find that uniqueness and express it for the positive benefit of others. That's my world.
I feel like a lot of days, especially on LinkedIn, right? You take a look at a lot of people, what they're posting, who they are, what is it that they do, who they serve, how they help people. I feel like there's a lot of disingenuous individuals on LinkedIn. I don't think that there's a lot of people that you understand, number one, when you are looking for someone to come into your business and help you with a specific task and or problem. I feel like there's a lot of people that can't express that in a very clear, concise manner. And then on top of it, I feel like we are in a generation where, everyone's just trying to show off and be something that they're not. What do you feel? What's your interpretation to that?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Let's face it. I mean, at the end of the day, we're a conundrum wrapped in a bit of a clusterfuck, most of us. And so if we're
100%.
yeah, so if we're really honest and then about ourselves, I mean, we're amazing humans, but we're also fundamentally flawed. And the challenge when all in all these social environments, again, is that we're trained that the version of ourselves that we have to put out is the version we want to try to sell somebody else, and we're selling ourselves as well. At the end of the day, I just feel like we've got to decide who do we want to be and how do we want to show up. And my LinkedIn profile is like everybody else's LinkedIn profile. It usually doesn't say, "Hey, and by the way, I screwed up in the following ways: one, two, three, four, five, six." So I think there's a balance between projecting the image you want, but also understanding who you are. And I think that for me comes partly in the posts that I make. So if people look at my social and they look at the posts that I make, they're not going to just be happy, clappy, sort of this success, that success. If you follow me and do what I do, you're going to make $1 million. Fair enough. It is going to be about the human experience of life and business, failures and success, and all of those things. And that's how I manage my online presence so that I can sleep at night and feel good about the fact that I'm not lying to myself and others.
Here's the problem. I feel like a lot of individuals, they're not authentic anymore. Like the word authentic obviously is completely overused and over
Yeah.
misused, right? Authenticity is like it's just bullshit right now, honestly. And then you have the people that are trying to be authentic, but they don't know how. I feel as if you want to be the truest version of yourself without anybody saying in or coming in and talking about you, then you've got to align yourself with what in which who you are. That's
Yeah.
how I feel. What are your thoughts?
I totally agree because, at the end of the day, people because they're behind the screen and they have this distance from you, they can be wonderfully complimentary frankly, in fake ways, but they also can be quite cruel. And so you've got to have some chutzpah. You got to have, you got to have a bit of pair of cojones if you want to be online long enough, because people are going to be, frankly, quite ignorant, rude. And if you take it into your psyche, you're going to have a problem. And this goes back to making sure that we're whole in ourselves. And this is the challenge is I think so many people are trying to recreate themselves an image online or for their business to meet a deep need in themselves because of who they want to believe they are. If we're not whole in ourselves and we don't have a sense of self-security, then we're going to constantly be at the whims of everybody else of how I feel like you feel about me. And in a very real way, to be very frank, I don't care what you or someone else thinks about me. I care what I think about me. I care about the handful, the very small people, very small circle in my life whose opinion really matters to me on a regular basis. That's who I care about. But at the end of the day, I care about how I feel about myself. Because if I like myself and I'm comfortable in my own skin, then I'm going to reflect that and I'm going to become that for the benefit of myself and my business. But if I'm not comfortable in my own skin and I'm constantly looking for you to complete me, to make me, to affirm me and make me something that I'm not, that is an insidiously evil journey, which many people are on, unfortunately.
I Wow. First of all, well, excellently said. I mean, kind of just blew me away with what you just said. Um, I feel like a lot of adults, they have gotten so utterly, especially with me, because I'm significantly younger than you are. When I call people out on their shit for not being who they are, it's like, who the fuck, like, how the fuck do you not have this figured out yet? You know what I mean? And then they get mad, and then they have the audacity to call me angry. I'm not angry. I'm just calling you out on your shit that you failed to address.
Yeah. Well, and I think you made an interesting point, Sarah. I think the unfortunate part is that we have this belief that when you turn a certain age, whatever that is, that you're an adult. I'm going to suggest, I mean, the reality is that there's a lot of people in their, frankly, late teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, maybe 80s, if they happen to be still alive, that frankly aren't adults most days. In fact, they react and interact like children. And I think there
Yes.
is yeah, but I think there's a balance, and the balance for me in this and this is I think the balance that we want to and strike, and I want to strike, and that's the balance between being childlike and childish. So I don't want to be childish. I want to be a grown up. I want to own my own shit. I want to be an adult. I don't want to be childish, but at the same time, I want to continue to have the wonder of being childlike, of looking at things with an incurious, quizzitive nature, of of believing that things are possible when they seem that they're not. I remember my mom used to keep records from school, and I have a book of different grades that I have still to this day. My mom was a real record keeper before journaling was a big thing, or before scrapbooking was a thing. My mom did all that in the early 70s, late 60s. And what I realized in going through and looking at that, I remember one time, and we grew up in very difficult circumstances. My mom raised a group of us boys in a government housing where I live. My parents were divorced when I was quite young. And I remember, writing in my, I think it was grade one journal from school, what does Tim Windsor want to be? And I think I wanted to be an astronaut, I think. The reality is I was never going to be a fucking astronaut, okay? That's the reality. But you know what? I believed I could. And that's the wonder of being childlike, of
Right.
thinking that something is possible when it's not, of thinking about the best, of not being jaded by the shit that we experience in our life. So the balance here for me is I want to remain childlike. I want to have some naivety. Because if you don't have some naivety, you become cranky and
And
angry
bitter and
and bitter
toxic.
and all that crap. But at the
Yeah.
same time, I don't want to be childish. I want to be an adult. I want to take responsibility for my decisions. I want to take responsibility for my experience. I want to take
Mhm.
responsibility for my reactions, which aren't always, frankly, as whole or healthy as they should be. But every once in a while, when I mess up, I'm going to fess up. I'm going to stick my hand up and say that was on me. I shouldn't have spoken to you like that. I'm really sorry. That's an adult, in my opinion.
100%. I wish so many people understood this, right? And like, I feel like, listen, not to get, utterly too fucking personal here, but I was the kid that sat at the lunch table by herself for a very, very long time. Either I wasn't Asian enough or I wasn't Latin enough. I wasn't this, I wasn't that. Um, I never understood the ideology of not being childlike and or like insecurity in general. I think a lot of what people, especially adults, face right now is a lot of fucking insecurity. It's
Hmm.
like, and I think this isn't, I don't think that this is a newer issue. I think this is one that's already pre-existing. I think it's
Correct.
one that people have failed to address. Insecurity is the root of why you are not successful. The scarcity mindset literally holds you back from achieving anything great that you want to achieve. Listen, I'm just some freaking kid from a backwards town in New Jersey, and now I have Netflix, people from Netflix that I talk to. I have a billionaire that I talk to on a regular basis. Like, I was nobody before I started my own business, but at least I fucking tried. The insecurity portion of me had to leave before I could do anything great, right? So why do you feel as if, as a true entrepreneur and adult, why do you feel like a lot of people are stuck in insecurity? I said this
Hmm.
to my mom the other day. Insecure parents make insecure adults.
Hmm. No, I think I think you're right on, Sarah. There's an epidemic of insecurity, and I forget when, maybe a year ago or so, I did a podcast on this on this very subject around insecurity, really, and looking at it like dragons and demons. And I think that this is an epidemic, this insecurity, this inability again to be whole in ourselves and to be insecure unless someone is giving me the security I need, where it's coming from external forces. And I would agree. I think the number one failure in leadership, the bad behaviors that I've seen over the years in leaders, they're all rooted in, at some level, they're rooted in insecurity. When you're
Hmm.
insecure, then what happens is you bring people around you to give you that security, the very thing you don't need as a leader. You need people who are going to make you unsecure. They're going to challenge you. They're going to challenge your security. They're going to challenge your certainty so you can move forward. And I think this is a problem everywhere. And I think also it does come back to parenting. And I think part of this has to do with, again, how complete are we in ourselves?
Hmm.
I think about my own adult daughter, and frankly, it's maybe it was more with my daughter than with my son, I think just from socialization. But this idea again that until my daughter found, her prince, whatever that was, it somehow she wasn't whole. That she should search all her life for her soulmate, her missing part of herself, so she can then find another human to
Yeah,
complete
so
her.
that she feels complete.
Correct. And that is so harmful because what has done is we've created and parented generations that effectively we've told them they were half a person. And
Yeah.
until and unless they found another half of the puzzle and put it together, there was no wholeness. And so I think that our psychological sort of processes, the way we look at it, the way we've parented, if we look at the insecurity that consumerism can give us about never having enough, it makes us insecure about what we have. All of this is insidiously evil because the one thing we need to become is secure in ourselves. Now, I think we got to be careful because this isn't about believing all your own bullshit either. Because sometimes, frankly, I'm just dead fucking wrong. That's just the reality.
We're
I am
human,
not, I'm
but
not
we're
right.
human though.
I'm human. I'm wrong. And I got to admit
Yeah.
it. And I got to take
Yeah.
responsibility for my own bullshit. And that's what
Yeah.
adults do. But you got to be secure in yourself, or you're constantly looking for others to do this for you. And that creates a bunch of really difficult problems in our society and in our businesses, from my perspective.
I feel like, first of all, what you just hit on was the archetype for my younger 20s. In Chinese Latin culture, they're going to tell you get married very young. Prince Charming didn't come my way at all. So, also at the same time, I thought when I was younger, I was ready to get married like a dumbass. Far from it now. 26 years old. I am so good not being married right now. I'm actually very much enjoying my life. But we sell this fucking lie
Hmm.
saying you need to have another person to feel secure. You need to have this to be secure. You need to have that to be secure. It's like, no, dude. That insecurity is deep, 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 all the way down within yourself. And no car, no house, no fat ass bank account is going to solve that. You have to want to solve it within you.
Yeah, it's so true. My daughter is 36 and she got married last year, and
Oh, phenomenal.
she found a really great guy, Andrew. He's an awesome guy. They are really good for each other, which is great, and I'm really glad that she found somebody.
Right.
At the same time, I will tell you that she asked me to give a speech at the wedding,
Mhm.
and my father of the bride speech was entitled "Don't Buy Into the Soulmate Bullshit." That was the title of my speech.
That's
And that's how
awesome.
it started. And what I said to them at the end of the day is that I believe that healthy relationships or a healthy partnership or marriage or whatever one wants to call it these days, I believe a healthy relationship between two adults is two whole adults or fractured adults coming into a relationship, managing their own self, not trying to fix one another. That's not my responsibility, and my daughter's responsibility is not to fix her husband, and his responsibility is surely not to fix my daughter.
Right.
Their responsibility is to enter the relationship as whole as possible, recognizing that we're not quite whole. And then, frankly, as I would counsel everybody and everybody I talk to in business, I say every leader, every person needs a coach and a therapist, for crying out loud, okay? Because we got shit in our lives and it gets in the way of how we think and how we process and how we feel. And if we're not willing and committed to deal with that, we're going to work out that shit on other people. We're going to lead through it. We're going to run our businesses through it. We're going to relate to one another through that lens of all that bullshit about what we see and believe about ourselves and others. And this year, coming in 2026, on my podcast on Commodified, I started doing a series of podcasts with a friend of mine who is a psychotherapist. She's amazing. Her name's Lenore Walker. And I did a couple of episodes in 2025. I'm going to bring her on the show. She's going to become my resident psychotherapist.
That's
So every
awesome.
quarter, I'm going to have a conversation with Lenore Walker, the psychotherapist, and we're going to talk about the real challenges of living whole in a fractured world and how we have to take responsibility for our own psychological maturity and our own psyche and not put that work on other people. That's something we're going to talk about because I think it's important.
I didn't read any books about this. I just knew how not to be an asshole. Like it's so easy not to be a, excuse my language, a literal asshole. It's so
Yeah,
easy. Think about it in leadership. You can go buy John Maxwell's book of leadership anywhere and everywhere in the place of like the planet Earth, okay?
yeah,
You can go buy it on Audible. You can go buy it on Amazon. You can go get it at Barnes and Nobles. You can go get it probably from almost every single bookstores in the United States.
yeah.
Here's the problem. The problem is that when you have insecure individuals, you got bad leadership in companies. Not only are they going to get screwed at work, they're going to get screwed at home. Think about it. If you got an insecure partner at home, you're going to get that insecurity and be gaslighted every single day at home. That's
Yeah.
number one. Number two, if you have an insecure leader at work, you're then going to be gaslighted at work then. So your home and your work life are now completely emotionally unstable, and then that's going to cause a bunch of fucking chaos, right? So what is the solution to this? Obviously, no matter how much you tell people you're jealous, you're insecure, you've got some deep childhood trauma that you haven't dealt with, no one wants to listen. So what is the solution to this?
Well, again, I do think the solution is being willing to go inside your life and work on it yourself. And I think we want a quick fix. I mean, in North America particularly, but in the globe around the globe right now, in 2026, we want this amazing quick fix to just sort of make this happen, and we want somebody else to do it for us. I think this is where the hard work of going in. This is the hard work, that the ancient philosophers talked about. This is the hard work that's required to go in and wrestle these things out. Scott Peck, great writer, he wrote a bunch of books, and he was a psychologist in the early '80s. One of the books that he wrote was called "Marching to the Beat of a Different Drummer." And Scott Peck, in that book and some other books, he talks about what he calls the tunnel of chaos. I'll call it the tunnel of candid and compassionate conversation, so it doesn't sound quite as bad. But basically, he said the tunnel of chaos is where you take yourself or others in and you wrestle out and find real relationship where you deal with your problems, where you're honest with yourself, where you're honest with each other, and you can come out the other side and be more authentic with yourself or in relationship. I think the only pathway to wholeness for ourselves and the only pathway for wholeness between two people is to be willing to go in and contend for what's important in what Scott called that tunnel of chaos, that wrestling. And there's an ancient story, I think, that really reminds me of this when I think about it. And it happens to be a religious story. I don't see it, as a religious truth. I see it more as a fable. So I'll call it a bit of like a fable. But there's an interesting story that I find just fascinating, and I think it really is instructive in this way of how we find our way to something new and different. So, according to the Jewish Old Testament, there was a man named Jacob. Jacob's name meant deceiver. Literally, his name meant deceiver. Nice name to give your child. Hey, let's name this guy Deceiver. And according to the story, Jacob was a deceiver from the time he was born. It says metaphorically he clutched the heel of his brother Esau on the way out. He eventually deceived his father. Jacob deceived their father to give the older brother Esau's inheritance to Jacob. He
That's
was a
correct.
shithead. He was a dickhead. He was a terrible human. But there's a fascinating part in this fable, this story. And again, if a person's religious, they can see it a certain way. If you're not religious, just listen to this instructive fable, because what happens eventually is a divine being comes and has a wrestling match with Jacob. And this is the tunnel of chaos, in my opinion. And so
Hmm.
what happens is Jacob begins to wrestle with this spiritual being. In the middle of this wrestling, there's a fascinating part of the story that just flabbergasts me. This divine being that ought to be fairly all knowing says to Jacob, "What's your name?" That's a really stupid question to me. And reality is I don't think that the angel or the spiritual being needed to know his name. I think he was asking, or they were asking, or it was asking Jacob a question for his own benefit. What is your name? Who are you? And he literally says, I am Jacob, the
Son
deceiver.
of.
All right. And immediately, I think he has a revelation. He has to come. He says, I'm Jacob. I'm a deceiver. I'm a shithead. I'm a terrible person. I've taken advantage of my brother. I'm a bad person. And they have this wrestling that continues. And at the end of the story, and this is the power about identity change for me and how
Yeah.
we move out of where we are. At the end of the wrestling, the divine being says, you know what? Yes, you were Jacob, but now I'm going to change your name. You're now going to be Israel.
Yeah.
Israel means Prince of God. All of a
Right.
sudden, he goes from being deceiver to being a Prince of God. And
Hmm.
according to the story, the angel then sticks their finger into Jacob's socket of his hip and gives him
Yep.
a
And
limp.
breaks it.
Correct. And for the rest of his life, according to the story, Jacob walked with a limp, reminding himself that he was once a deceiver. Now he had an identity change, but it came through wrestle and struggle. And I think that's why the limp in our life is really important. Because if we don't wrestle out our shit, if we don't wrestle out our deceptive natures with ourselves and maybe a divine being, we can never walk forward. The story is amazing because Jacob limps away from that experience. And
That's
for the
right.
first time ever, he humbles himself in front of his brother Esau and apologizes.
Yeah, because
That,
he took
Sarah,
Esau's inheritance. That's why.
yeah,
He took
exactly.
Esau's blessing away
Correct,
from him.
exactly. And Sarah, this is why I think it still is true. The only way to wrestle your insecurity, the only way to wrestle your deceptive nature, the only way to wrestle the bullshit in your life is to go into a place of wrestling with some kind of divine entity, whatever that is to you, and
Hmm.
work out your shit and then walk forward and be different. That story for me is so instructive because I think, and this is why, going back to what we started with, whenever we pretend we don't have a limp, we're deceiving ourselves.
Oof.
Jacob walked with a limp for the rest of his life. And by the way, that's what I love about the flaws that humans have, that you have, that I have. It's
Right.
the limp. It's the human part of the wrestling. You only limp when you've wrestled something out and you've been marked by it. That's how we have to move forward. And if we're afraid to show people that we limp, we're always going to live in some self-deception, in my opinion.
I did. Let me tell you something. I read through the whole entire book of Genesis in 14 days because I have a Bible at home. I'm a Christian, right? So what just going back to the Jacob story, what honestly shocked me about that story was is that people would fuck you over just so they get ahead. But normally, and I want everyone who's watching going to watch this listen to me, if you fuck someone over to get to the top, you most likely 9 out of 10 times will also fall because that's
Mhm.
not how life works.
No, no. Listen, there's a certain recompense, call it karma, call it whatever you want to
A
call it, but
hundred percent, and
there's
that is a bitch.
yeah, it is, and there's a boomerang effect eventually, and whether in this life or potentially the one to come, depending on what people's belief is. But the reality is that these stories and these things and these journeys are instructive. The other part, Sarah, that I find fascinating about that story is that later on in the Jewish scriptures,
Hmm.
as there's times in which the writers talk about how maybe the divine entity would want to identify themselves, particularly as it related to the
Circumstantial
Jew.
situations.
Yeah, and with the Jewish people, what I
Hmm.
love is that even though Jacob's name was tamed to Israel, when when later on when God apparently is describing themselves,
Hmm.
they say of themselves, "I am the God of Jacob,
Jacob, Israel, Isaac,
And
and
Jacob."
Jacob. Yeah.
Correct, not Israel. So what I love about that is I think that if there is a divine source in the universe,
Hmm.
I think that divine source primarily likes to identify us and relate to us in our brokenness because that's where we're loved. And that's where we have to learn to love ourselves. When we love ourselves in our own brokenness, that's the beginning of moving out of insecurity. If we love ourselves and if we can speak to ourselves in such a way, if you've got a friend and they've messed up, Sarah, I'm sure you can be forthright, but you can be wonderfully kind and compassionate.
A
And
hundred
by the way,
percent. I just had a situation just like this the other day.
yeah, and a lot of times though, we're not as kind and compassionate to ourselves. And this is where it goes back to we have to be able to say, I am a flawed individual. I fuck up every day. I have problems. I make mistakes. I do bad things. I do great things. This is all of me. I'm this conundrum of all of this behavior. And at the end of the day, I got to settle in and be able to say, I like who I am.
Yeah.
I like who I am. I'm okay with who I am. Not just okay. I am a unique individual created for greatness. And I don't want to trade that for anything else. Any other transaction that we endeavor and we take into our lives that moves us away from the greatness and the potential that we have as humans to affect the world around us, whether that's in a business set or a social setting or in a
Right.
government setting or
Nonprofit,
in a school,
whatever the
doesn't
case may
matter.
be.
Yeah, we've got to find we're here for a reason. I have to believe. So, what is that reason? And then, how do I execute that in such a way that my identity is not wrapped up in its success? It's wrapped up in who I am intrinsically when I get out of bed.
I feel like a lot of people, by the way, I completely agree with everything you just said. I think that a lot of people, when they get here and they're growing up and they have a lot of bad shit happen to them, they're getting bullied in school, whatever the case may be, they have a
Yeah.
bad, home that they're growing up in, which is obviously very unfortunate. But, you know, if you can find a way to look past all the circumstances that try to break you,
Mhm.
you will be a better person for it as an adult because you've already experienced what it's like to get fucked over by people, be broke,
Yeah.
do this, do that. Like, if you can survive struggle,
Yeah.
you will normally become the GOAT.
Yeah. Well, listen, at the end of the day, the one thing that we all have as humans is we all have a subset of struggle. It's at different levels, of course, and some times it's easy to look at other people's lives and think that they're so simple. I mean, we only need to look at very famous people, very rich people who lives sometimes crumble, and we realize that as much as they had everything that we think we wanted, they were shells of individuals along the way. That doesn't matter, as you said, how much money you have or how much success you have. At the end of the day, though, we have to find an ability to love ourselves. This issue of a limp is interesting to me. And I don't share this with very many people, but I'll share it on your podcast, so we'll share it with lots of people. When I was a kid and I was really struggling with my own identity and frankly hating myself in my life, in a period of
I
time,
think we were all there at one point in our lives.
I'm sure that we were. I got in a lot of trouble at school, and I had back when I went to school, when you got in trouble, you had to write lines on the board. You had to write these
Okay.
lines on the board. So when I felt bad about myself, I had a book, and I used to write over and over, "I hate Tim Windsor. I hate Tim Windsor. I hate Tim Windsor." And for years, I wrote that probably thousands of times in this book. I eventually burnt that book. But I'll tell you this, I have a limp when it comes to that still. Sometimes when I'm signing my signature, I get stuck and I can't make my hand right. And I believe it's a hiccup, a holdover in my psyche from how many times I punished myself by writing I hate Tim Windsor. I actually have a mental tick to today, and I'm in my 60s, that sometimes when I go to sign my signature, I can't actually make my hand work. And I believe it's a leftover for me, but it's also a reminder when that happens and I can't get my hand to cooperate. It's a reminder that, man, oh man, I
Sorry,
really
my
love
phone's
who
going off real quick.
that's all right. I really love who I've become. And so that's part of my own journey. And again, I don't share that with very many people, but I think it's apropos based on the conversation we're having.
I
I have
think
a bit of a limp in my own hand about my own name sometimes.
I got bullied so horrifically in school, I wanted to really do hating myself. I got suspended for something I didn't do out of college. I had to basically restart my entire college degree over when I was basically like in between my sophomore and my junior year of college. I graduated with below a 3.0 GPA from college. Um, and I had, after I got suspended, I had my own family telling me I would never be anything. They told me that for dreaming of being on in Forbes, in Entrepreneur Magazine, and owning a Lamborghini and running multiple different businesses. They're like, who the fuck do you think you are? You're no one. You're never gonna be as rich as these other people are going to be. It's not you. And then to be compared to my own family members was fucking horrific
Hmm.
because, by the way, out of all three kids, I have the most successful business in 2 years. So, it why I feel as if hurt people, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
If we do not stop this incessant need to break people, the
Hmm.
cycle continues.
Yeah.
I tell everyone if you have nothing nice to say coming out of your mouth, shut the fuck up respectfully. Because you have no idea what that person's going through. And you
Yeah.
want to sit there, but you'll criticize, but you don't like being criticized yourself.
Correct. Yeah. No, and it is.
Hypocritical.
Yeah. And by the way, it's a really hard discipline, as you said. But the reality is that when, I've had situations in my life where I've got into difficult situations, even in my business with with customers, let's say disagreements that I've had with customers
Hmm.
over the years. Because you work very deeply with people long enough, you're going to piss them off. They're going to piss you off. That's
Of
just the
course.
reality. And so, in the moment, it's very hard to do. And I would like to think that I'm better at it now than I used to be. But what I become really great at is being able to step back, particularly after the emotions start to subside of the pain of being hurt, because there's a lot of reaction that happens in those moments. But when I compress myself and come back to my center, I most often find myself, even as I did the other day, talking to my daughter about something, and I said, but what if though there's something else going on in that person's life right now that we're not aware of? What if actually they're reacting and responding out of some kind of deep hurt in them that we don't perceive? And that doesn't excuse their behavior.
Of
And
course
this
not.
is important.
Of
It
course
doesn't
not.
excuse the behavior, but what it does is it makes me more compassionate to that behavior. And that was true even in my own family situation with my mom and my dad. They had very difficult upbringings, and then they created a family that then blew up and all of that kind of stuff that happened. But it wasn't until later on in life that I went back and I viewed those different circumstances in my life that were quite painful from what I would refer to now as the place of an empathetic observer,
Hmm.
where I looked at situations where my dad was reacting and treating me in a way that he should never have. But I put myself back into those circumstances mentally, and I almost became like a fly on the wall. And I tried to look at those as an empathetic observer of my dad's own pain. That didn't excuse what he did. But what it did is it gave me a context in which I could choose, and it is a choice, to grant forgiveness. Because the reality is that an unforgiving human, an unforgiving heart, my own unforgiveness binds me back to those circumstances in ways I can never get free. Forgiveness for me is not about pretending it didn't hurt. Forgiveness isn't about excusing. In fact, forgiveness acknowledges that there is pain and hurt and it must be dealt with. But there becomes a point in time when we can look at these circumstances of our life and we can look at them from an empathetic observer perspective, and then we can choose to grant forgiveness as much for our own benefit than for the benefit of the other individuals. Now, forgiveness does not mean the removal of consequences, and that's different.
Of course
So there's
not.
certain consequences that were natural consequences of the behavior that my parents exhibited, particularly my dad. There was a consequence in our relationship forever, frankly, but
Right.
that consequence was different than being choosing to be forgiving or unforgiving. I think that's where we also have to ask ourselves, and whether it's in business or whether it's in life. I mean, I've met some really brutally unforgiving leaders who, when a person makes a mistake, they're never forgiven for that mistake, and they're never given any
And
other
it'll always
opportunity in
be held
business.
over their head as if it just happened yesterday.
That's correct.
That's
And there's time,
so
yeah,
toxic.
it is. And Sarah, you make a good point. There's times where I'm talking to leaders and they're talking about somebody and they're royally pissed with somebody. And every once in a while I'll say, can you ask you a question? When did that happen? And sometimes they're like, oh, 2 years ago. I'm like, you're talking like it happened yesterday, for crying out
Right.
loud.
Like the
Correct.
same anger and like
Yes.
resentment you had 2 years ago, you're acting like this just happened 48 hours ago.
That's correct. And that's where again we have to look at ourselves in human ways. We have to look at other people in human ways. We have to deal with some of the macro things of life. We have to think about
Yeah.
acceptance and forgiveness and identity and wrestling and choosing then to walk in the freedom of becoming more whole every day as humans. I
I
mean,
struggled myself with the idea of unforgiveness. It wasn't until I met an incredible individual. She knows who she is, she's gonna watch this, that she said, if you don't forgive and if you don't let go, you will not get to where you want to be because that will always be a chain. Imagine this
yeah,
metaphorically and or methodically. You have a ankle
yeah,
chain with a ball, and that drags you all the way down to the depths of the bottom of the sea, right?
yeah.
If you do not let that go, aka unforgiveness, in metaphorically speaking, you will be kept at the bottom. People that get to the top normally do the work on themselves for
Yeah.
the unforgiveness portion of it, which is obviously very, very hard to let go. I
It
think
is.
it's
And
probably
yeah.
the hardest thing for a human to let go.
It is, and again, it's forgiving of ourselves, it's
Yeah.
forgiving of others, it's doing all these things. When I think of this issue, I think of Shakespeare's play. I love Shakespeare, always have. And Shakespeare, the play Othello is a very powerful
It's my favorite
play.
play
Uh,
by Shakespeare.
it's great.
Othello.
It's and there's this idea of pound of flesh, and we think about this metaphorically. That in this sort of Elizabethan play, there's
Hmm.
a revenge that can be exacted on
Hmm.
somebody, and the revenge is you get to take a sword and you get one swipe, and they weigh the flesh, and it has to be exactly a pound, because if it isn't, then the full punishment comes on you.
Right.
And sometimes, again, we use this term now metaphorically. Sometimes I want my pound of flesh. This is where
Right.
this comes from. But
Right.
the reality is that you cannot usually strike another human and get exactly a pound of flesh in exactment. And so you end up punishing yourself along the way. And this is why forgiveness is just as much or more for you, for me, than it is for you,
Yeah.
because I'm releasing myself from something, because it's really hard to keep having to stick you up there and vilify you forever, because now I got to be attached to that moment of pain forever. And I don't want to be. And again, and this is where I do think, no, if you're listening into this podcast conversation and you think that we've gone off track, we're not talking about business anymore, you're wrong. Because the reality is that in
This is
life and business, this is what cripples leaders and cripples businesses. It is not their ability. They've got great products and they can read a P&L and they can grab customers and they
right.
can
And they can
understand
have a
market
board
share.
meeting. They can do
They can
this.
do
They can
all
run
right.
teams.
Right, but if they can't act as adults, and if they can't forgive people along the way, and if they can't be secure in themselves and love themselves, all the other stuff goes to hell in a handbasket and vaporizes,
Yeah.
because it's this stuff that brings down empires. It's
A
this
hundred
stuff that brings
percent.
down communities. It's this stuff that brings down businesses. It's not your lack of ability to read a fucking P&L.
Let me tell you something. I was offered my father's company to run it and to own it as a secondary owner. Okay. I said no to a $5 to $10 million company. Why? Because of the fact that number one, I knew I was always going to be controlled under his leadership, which isn't the best. And then on top of that, I also knew if I was going to change anything, normally I would have to go through permission for it. I was like, what the fuck is this? A dictatorship? No, I'll go start my own thing. I started my own company with $40 in my pocket, but I talk about leadership. I was actually on the phone with a very good friend of mine yesterday, and I was talking about leadership. I was like, if you don't have the brilliance of discernment inside of you to make executive decisions when it comes to leadership, no one is going to respect you. Point blank, fucking period. The ability to communicate how you feel and give your employees the autonomy and diplomacy that they deserve to make authoritative decisions within your organization is how they actually stay. People bitch and complain about, oh, employee retention. This is how you solve it. Very simple. Give them a voice. It's very simple. Let them talk and let them share their ideas. Normally, let me tell you something. If you give your employees the room to speak their minds, they might come up with a multi-million-dollar idea that you didn't have, and that adds another 100 million to your company, 200 million, whatever the case may be. But employees don't like feeling like they don't have a shot to talk. Think about the
Yeah,
most effective teams in the world. They have their employees. Like, don't just
yeah.
sit there and be quiet. If you got something to say, open up your mouth.
Yeah, and it goes back to where we started the conversation about insecurity. Insecure leaders, because they don't believe that their voice is enough, cannot give a voice to others. Insecure leaders get threatened when another leader, or even worse, an employee becomes more, quote, popular than they are. That is the
Yep.
insecurity
The
beast. And
jealousy.
yes, and people need to slay that beast. Insecurity is a beast,
A
and
hundred percent.
yes,
A
and
lot
it
of
needs
people
to be
got it.
slain. Yeah, and because to your point, it'll make you have to push down everybody around you so you can feel good.
Right,
You
because
have to oppress them. You have to
yeah,
suppress their voice. You have to suppress their contribution,
yeah,
because that's the only way that you can feel good in and of yourself.
right.
Great secure leaders. I remember years ago, I consulted in the insurance industry and I met a leader who was one of the best leaders I've ever met over the years. And I won't give the company, but a phenomenal guy. And I remember I happened to be doing some consulting. It was over the turn of the year. So I got to go to their end of year celebration. And once a year,
Very cool.
this was a very large, probably 80 to $120 million company at the time. So he would shut down his company for a full day every year. And at the end of the year, he'd shut it down for a full year, for a full day. Just shut it down like it was a weekend. Okay, done. Not open. He'd bring all of his people to celebrate, give them a meal, thank them for their contribution. He was an amazing guy. And that this time he got up, and I want to say it was 2007, around that, and it was so now it's going to become 2008. And I remember he was up at the front and he was just a charismatic, kind, compassionate man, very powerful. And he was addressing his employees, about 300 of them, and thanking them for their contribution and all this. And he says to them, I only need one thing from you this year. And up on the screen comes this graphic, and it says, scare yourself. And he says to them, I only need you to do one thing this year. I need you to do things that scare you. Because if you're not doing things that scare you, we're not changing, growing, and expanding and evolving. I also need you, next slide, to fail. I need you to fail. Because if you're not failing, then you're not pushing yourself. And then the next slide came up. But when you fail, I need you to fix it fast and admit you failed. That's it. That's the only three things I need from you next year. Let's have a great party. Let's go on. That is a wise leader.
Leadership is so easy to master. It just starts with yourself. It literally it starts with your habit, your daily habits. Cup
Yeah.
of coffee, go to work out, read your Bible, whatever the case may be. Have some, routine things in your routine that are going to build that type of discipline. Number one.
Yeah.
Number two, transmit that into your team. It's very
Yeah.
simple. Show and if anybody's watching this, be open and honest about what works for you,
Yeah.
because you never know who's in that room that may need to hear what's working for you. Maybe they've been
Correct.
thinking about it and they're not going for it because they're a little bit scared. Show your experience, talk about your experience, be personable with your teams. This is
Yeah.
not a foreign concept. I think the reason why my generation is leaving corporate is because we look at the leadership that's in fucking place. A lot of people are washed up. You don't know modern day times. You expect the younger generation to tolerate your bad behavior, and that's not going to happen with us.
No.
We are
No.
not going to sit in an office for another 30 to 45 years tolerating your bullshit. You're washed
Yeah.
up, you're exhausted, and you're tired, and you got a bad attitude. So if you think that my generation is going to sit there in a cubicle and tolerate your BS, you're out of your mind.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of young kids are being like, well, we have AI now. We can just go start an AI company. Why not?
Mm.
You
Yeah.
see my generation the most entrepreneurial in 100 years than ever beforehand. No generation has started more companies than my generation right now. Period. That's a fact. Okay?
Yeah.
That's just a
Yeah.
real statistic. The problem is that if you want young kids to come into your organizations and work for you, you are going to have to change something.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah. Listen, we have to evolve and we have to move forward. And you know what? And I'm glad for everything you just said because the reality is, and again, I want to look back as an empathetic observer. If we look at a lot of the businesses that were founded in North America post-war, we look at that leadership style. Again, those people came out of the war. It was a command and control structure. I mean, they needed that for survival and to win this quote the war they were in. They needed all that structure. They came back in. They brought that into corporate America, corporate Canada, corporations all over the world, and they ran those businesses with very authoritarian structures for years. The reality is that it's a very different day today, and the way that people look at leadership and authority is different. It used to be that if you had a title that gained you a certain amount of respect. Now that's not true, and I do think that we need to earn the right to lead others. We just don't have the right to do it. And to your point, this is not that
It's
difficult.
like almost like a pissing contest like 30 years ago
Yeah,
of
yeah,
who
it
the hell
was.
is going to be more authoritative.
Correct. And so, if we think about it, I mean, if we look at structure, I mean, we had a very authoritative top down, do what I tell you, you get no contribution sort of environment. I think that to your point, most people are moving towards, and particularly the younger generation, they want more of a more democratized, we'll call it,
Yeah,
experience. And and what I mean by that is a collegial contribution where where opinions matter, voices matter, where there's collegiality, where yes, we understand that some people hold more authority, but we understand that authority is shared for the positive benefit of everyone around. And so people are wanting to move towards these different models and of leadership, and I think we should. I think that what leaders have to become great at, in my opinion, is that they have to stop believing that they have to control the environment through demands and edicts. I think what we do is we set controls in the environment when we think of it this way. I think that we need to be clear about our values and we need to be clear about our priorities. When we're clear about our values, that shouldn't change. They should govern behavior.
of
And as long as
course.
people are orbiting around those values, then all decisions that orbit around those values are good. If our priorities are XYZ and people are their decisions are orbiting around those priorities, then we have a really wonderful system. It's what I would call the difference between, we'll call it the difference between a centered set organization and a bounded set.
Yeah.
And if we look at organizational theory, so a bounded set is you draw a box with all the rules and regulations and
Hmm.
say you're in if you stay within this box. If you get
Right.
outside the box, you don't belong.
Right.
A centered set organization is structured the way the cosmos is. The planets don't stay in line with each other because, there's a big box in the universe and the planets just go within the box. That's not the way it works. The planets revolve around a life-giving center called the sun, and that
Right.
gravitational pull and orbit causes them to stay in concert around that,
Right.
not to hit one another. And there's a wonderful dance that happens in the universe because of the positive attraction to a center. I think great organizations and great leaders do the same thing. They set up a positive sense of energy in the middle, values and priorities, and they ask people to come and align and orbit around them. And when we do that, then there is power that happens, there's wondrous things that happen. But no longer should we just draw a box and say, this is the box of who we are, you're in or you're out. We should call people to orbit around the values and priorities that will move us all forward. And if your values are different than mine, we shouldn't orbit together. And if your values are the same, we should. And if my priorities are not your priorities, then we should shake hands and move on. This is, I think, a better way to look at organizations for the next 20 to 30 years, in my opinion.
I think another great thing that leaders could do is to how about ask, what do you need?
Hmm?
What do you need?
Hmm.
What do you need? Just ask the question, are you okay? Is
Yep.
everything at home okay? Are you doing okay? Like that actually goes a long fucking way with a
It sure
lot
does.
of people. It does.
Yep. No, it
And
does. It
it's
does.
such an easy question to ask. Obviously, it's very personal,
Hmm.
obviously. And I would do it not in like,
Yeah.
someone's cubicle. I'd bring them into the office to make sure that they're okay. But, you
Right.
know, it's such an easy thing to ask. And you
Mm.
would be shocked at how many people say, no, I'm not fine because I
Yeah.
got this going on. I've got this going
Yep.
on. How can I better support you then? How can we
Yeah.
fix this problem so you're not as stressed here? Because I see you here and you're completely stressed out. You're overwhelmed. Like it's so simple to ask these questions. And here's the problem is that most people don't have emotional intelligence. You have to have a high EQ in order to ask questions like this. You
Yep.
can tell immediately based off body language when someone's not fine.
Yeah. And yeah, it's again, it's a lot simpler than people want to make it out, and that's what makes it hard, frankly. If it's so simple, it's hard in the sense that you've got to get out of yourself. You've got to ask better questions, to your point. You have to actually care. You got to give a shit.
Yeah.
And
I
not
didn't know
just
that
about
was
what
such a complicated topic these days, is
I know,
giving a
I know.
shit.
You just got to give a shit. You got to give a shit about the people who you journey with, and not just the destination, about the destination of where you want to go. That that that's the way we're going to have to challenge ourselves. And again, I'm fortunately part of obviously a very different demographic and generation than you are. And I'm not saying I got all my shit together either, because I don't, but I challenge myself every day to ask myself better questions about how I want to interact, how I want to show up, how I want to lead myself, how I want to lead others, and how I want to encourage leaders to lead their teams. And that's the business I've been in for a long time, and I'll continue to do it as long as there's value that I can provide to a subset of customers.
I think the I love everything you just said. I think that people don't invest in leadership coaches because they're afraid of what will come out of it.
Yeah.
I think that's the pure main reason why people don't invest in coaching at all is because of the fact that they're afraid to look at themselves because they're afraid of looking back at what they see.
Yeah. Yeah, listen, and this is the thing is that, think about high performing athletes. The one thing that they're committed to is being continued to be coached and to practice.
Right?
So if you
They're
take a
continuing to
high,
excellence.
correct. So if you take a high performing, whether it's a football player or a basketball player or a hockey player, soccer player, whatever, you take whatever. And you look at, you take a person like, let's say Sidney Crosby in hockey. The guy's been playing hockey a
Oh,
long time.
great player. I follow
Yeah.
hockey very
Yeah.
deeply, so
And Sidney Crosby still shows up to the rink every week to practice. Okay. He doesn't say, I don't need to practice anymore. He shows up every week. And he also continues to submit to the wisdom of coaches, and
right,
he's willing to be coached.
right,
And to your point, the problem is many people in business, they want to be the quote Sidney Crosby of their market, but they're not willing to practice the art and craft of leading people well. And they're not open to the coaching that comes either in the game or actually in the practice when no one's looking. The
right.
reason why Sidney Crosby is still as good as he is that if he's working on something like if he wants to get a little bit at taking a face off, he's at practice taking 400 of them for fuck's
Right,
sakes.
right,
And we got leaders who want to show up and they want to be great communicators, but they don't practice the art and craft of communicating. Well, and then you want to be world class. You're not going to be world class. And to your point, you got to submit to some coaching, and you got to be willing to open to coaching from others, but you also have to be open to practice the art and craft of leading and thinking and all these things that, by the way, don't happen when there's thousands of people in the stands applauding for you. There's nobody in the stands during practice.
right.
And the problem is that we have to get willing and want and desire to get better at something when no one is looking. That's the secret of greatness. And it always has, and in my opinion, always will be.
I think that you're absolutely right. I know that I suffered from my inability to communicate for a very long time because I didn't talk about how I felt. I also didn't really have an environment that I could at all. I thought if I talked about how I really felt, then honestly, I was going to automatically be rejected, which was most of the time the case when I was a kid. So I think that we've done a piss poor job at trying to teach people at how to communicate effectively, how to become incredible leaders. We've done a piss poor job. What the fuck is going to change though? Right? It's
Yeah.
up to incredible people like yourself that are going to change the status quo.
Well, and here's the thing is, and this is just for me, I guess, sort of how I'd put a bow on this conversation for me, which, by the way, I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's just thoroughly provocative. It's inspiring. It's such an important conversation. So the term status quo is interesting to me. In Latin, it means the state in which we find something.
Right.
And I think the thing is that what I have really challenged myself and what I would challenge you, Sarah, and all your listeners with is that we should stop worrying about the status quo and others in society. We should start worrying about the status quo in ourselves. I think the greatest people that I've met over the years, they wage war, relentless, aggressive war against the status quo in themselves. And when you do that, then that opens up an opportunity and people will respect and invite you to challenge the status quo in them. But the status quo needs to be fixed here in my heart first, in my mind, not in societies, not in the worlds, not in business, not in governments, not in the Senate, not in the Congress, not in the House of Commons where I live in Canada. The status quo needs to be changed in my heart and
Yeah.
my mind. And when I do that and you do that, then the status quo changes around us. So I'm going to work on changing the status quo in Tim Windsor. not so that I can love myself, not so I can become more acceptable to myself, because I like myself just the way I am. I love myself the way I am. I'm fully accepted in myself, but I still want to change the status quo, not to get something I don't have, but to become a better form of myself and for every other human I interact with in business and in life and in the grocery store. That's it.
I love that. Uh, to me, I love myself. I've honestly had to do so much work within myself for the past, I would say probably 2 years to find myself again. I honestly, I felt like for the majority of my early 20s, I didn't know who the hell I was because I wasn't doing all the things that I am doing right now. Like, I severely changed myself. Um, I think about me changing the status quo is becoming a person that where people hear my voice or they hear my name, they know that I'm not a person that they can fuck with. And then on top of it, that she was an incredible leader and let her team talk.
Hmm. I love
That's
it.
what I want people to remember me by.
That'll be a great thing to be remembered by. That's awesome. And listen, really, I mean, I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, Sarah. Obviously, you're a brilliant, yeah, young woman. You clearly have a awesome trajectory in front of you. And the best thing about it, in my opinion, is that you're not needing to do that to become someone you can love. You're doing that because you accept yourself fully in all your wonder and all of your flaws, and that's the best gift you can give yourself. All the other gifts you get along the way, they'll be wonderful. But the
Right.
biggest gift of all you're giving to yourself, which is a thorough and and actually fulsome welcoming and honoring of yourself. And there's
Yeah.
no other gift that you can give yourself or we can give another human. That's the best gift of all, in my opinion.
Yeah. Tim, it's been a great conversation. Thank you so much for your time and being here and sharing your wisdom with us.
Sarah, thanks for the time. Thanks very much. Really appreciate what you're putting out. Hope you have an awesome rest of the day. Cheers.
Thanks. Bye.